Hello again, everyone, and thanks for joining us for Sunday's edition of Alaska Weather. And up first, hazardous weather graphic showing a winter storm warning continues for the northeastern Brooks Range and portions of the eastern North Slope. And that's through tonight until 6 a.m. Monday morning. And total snowfall, or more snow expected, with total accumulations of 6 to 8 inches. And then for the southeastern Brooks Range, there's a winter weather advisory out for tonight until 6 a.m. Monday morning. And that's for continued snowfall, lighter amounts, so a few inches less, looking for total accumulations of 5 to 7 inches there. That should be done by tomorrow morning. And then farther to the south, Alaska Range, that's a winter weather advisory that's out until noon on Monday, looking for total snowfall of 11 inches in some areas, with some mixed in freezing rain there, creating some glaze, and south winds gusting to 55 miles per hour. And again, that's out until noon on Monday. And then down over the northern panhandle, actually the Klondike Highway has a winter weather advisory for snow, looking for 3 to 6 inches of snow along the Klondike Highway above 2,500 feet. That's for tonight into Monday, or through Monday. Otherwise, moving on to the satellite imagery. There we go. Get the cursor on the right window here. You can see low pressure tracking north. There are actually a couple of waves rolling up into southern Alaska today. One came in late last night, early this morning, kicked the winds up in some areas. Pretty gusty, and of course made for a very mild overnight period in most of southern Alaska. Some areas staying in the 40s until this morning, when the winds died off, became more variable, then fell under 40 degrees. But another low center coming up just south, just on making landfall on the southern Kenai Peninsula this afternoon, and that bringing pretty good wind and rain into the North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound area, and lighter amounts of rain into the panhandle with lighter winds there. As you can see, the main frontal system back to the west. That's mostly moving south to north, and a lot of cloudiness pushing up over the eastern interior. A couple of disturbances up along the Arctic coast, one on the east side there, and then another one approaching the western coast, really kind of falling apart. They'll just kind of pick the light snow up a little bit there as it reaches the coastline this evening and persists overnight tonight. Otherwise, a lot of cold air coming southward over the Bering Sea out of the Bering Strait, with high pressure over the northwest Bering Sea, circulating that down from north to south through the Bering Strait into St. Lawrence Island, and taking more of a northeasterly direction over the southern Bering Sea. Not too bad over the Aleutians today. You can see just some areas of clouds with areas of clearing. Same thing for the Alaska Peninsula. And also clearing out with colder temperatures over the western part of the state along the west coast, Yukon Delta, up in the northwest interior areas. And let's see, I think this goes through one more time. And this system coming up from the south, that's about the last one. Frontal boundary will kind of shift in over the northern panhandle and slowly dissipate over the next couple of days. And then you can see the clouds coming south of the Alaska Peninsula. They're coming onto the map with the next system. But today, there's that low coming northward, 995 millibar low coming onto the south coast of the Kenai Peninsula. And pretty good winds, gale force winds along the North Gulf Coast and the offshore areas as well, with gusts of anywhere from 50 to as high as 65 miles per hour. Bligh Reef seeing peak wind gusts about 57 miles per hour today. And a fair amount of rain, but nothing all that heavy. Let's see, Seward and Cordova picked up about an inch during the day today, 12-hour rainfall amount. And let's see, Seldovia had 3/4 of an inch of rain, and about 1/4 of an inch at Homer and Kodiak, while over at Yakutat they picked up about 1/2 inch of rain, and Sitka on the southern portion of that warm front had about 1/3 of an inch of rain, and generally less than 1/10 of an inch down over the southern southeast coast. Areas of light snow falling over much of the central and eastern interior and all the way up to the eastern Arctic coast, and from the central Arctic coast too as well on the west side there, some light snow and flurries there, with pretty gusty winds along the southwest coast today as well. Cape Romanzoff seeing north winds gusting to 60 miles per hour, about 47 mile per hour wind gusts at Tooksuk Bay, and the Pribilofs 30 to 40 mile an hour wind gusts there. And then Delta Junction, southeast, or east-southeast actually, 51 mile per hour peak wind gusts there. Not much in the way of snow falling on the lee side of the Alaska Range there. But out to the west, just a weak trough over the far western Aleutians and high pressure up over the northwest Bering Sea. See tonight that moves eastward and starts to narrow out a little bit. New warm front brings rain into the western Aleutians with weak low pressure there over Bristol Bay and a trough extending northeastward, both at the surface and aloft. That's going to keep areas of snow showers or light snow going along that trough axis and back to the west and north, again up into the eastern Brooks Range area. That's where the heaviest snowfall will be for overnight tonight, with a warning on the northeastern Brooks Range and the advisory for the southeastern Brooks Range. And then again, rain and snow mainly over the northern panhandle. It'll probably dry out over the southern areas. Could see a little bit of clearing down toward Dixon Entrance with that high pressure over British Columbia. And a developing weak center in the Gulf of Alaska. So winds definitely coming down after some rain this evening, or rain and snow. Cook Inlet in the North Gulf Coast, things will begin to quiet down considerably as that low kicks off to the north and weakens. So look for the rain to end, or precipitation to end, by after midnight tonight toward morning, with some clearing around Kodiak Island. And for tomorrow, still some rain and snow showers along the North Gulf Coast. Snow showers possible Copper River Basin, areas of the eastern interior again, but that'll all be diminishing throughout the day from west to east slowly, with ridging high pressure and chillier temperatures over the western part of the state, North Slope and Arctic coast. And rain and snow continues for the North Gulf Coast, mostly rain along the coastline, and then mixing with snow, becoming all snow with any elevation at all, especially over the northern panhandle there, but just some scattered showers over the southern southeast coast. Next big storm pushing into the western Bering Sea, and look for winds and rain to increase, spread eastward to about the central Aleutians. And then you can see Tuesday that low center just coming onto the chart tomorrow afternoon. By Tuesday afternoon, 24 hours later, makes a pretty good jog to the northeast there into the Russian Far East, at least along the coastline. And that being directed northward and held back to the west by that strong area high pressure now over the Yukon, just about centered over Dawson. But that's going to keep much of interior Alaska variably cloudy to clear, with mostly light winds. Definitely a big increase in the winds. St. Lawrence Island could result in blowing snow there, but such a big push of warm air coming up from the south. You can see off the chart there, coming off the picture on the south end there, all the way to the north. So if you get into snow and blowing snow, St. Lawrence Island, I don't think it'll last very long with a warm front passing through by Tuesday evening. Otherwise, dry conditions and colder temperatures, but not bone-chilling cold, but probably a good portion of the interior will be below zero even throughout the daytime hours. And rain and snow showers continue persisting there with the leftover moisture from that frontal boundary over the northern panhandle reaching about Yakutat, but dry everywhere else. Lows tonight, 30s to lower 40s for the panhandle. Otherwise, a little colder over the Kuskokwim Valley in the north, down to 12 degrees at McGrath, Nikolai, Sparavon 23, mid to upper 20s Bristol Bay, mid 30s Kodiak Island, south central Alaska. Highs tomorrow, 30s to near 40 down toward the North Gulf Coast, and in the 40s for the Panhandle. Teens northern Kuskokwim Valley to mid 30s for Bristol Bay, followed by lows below zero Kuskokwim Valley there, and teens to mid 20s for Bristol Bay, mid 30s Kodiak Island, 20s south central Alaska, Susitna Valley, single numbers in the Copper River Basin, highs in the 40s for the southeast coast again, near 20 for the Copper River Basin, lower 30s to near 40 for the south central Alaska area. Up to the north, single numbers and teens for the lows tonight, followed by highs 5 to 15, maybe some areas in the mid 20s, Fairbanks over toward Eagle, and then lows much colder, or at least colder, back below zero over much of the interior areas, and then highs either side of zero. But look at the 20s there on the western Arctic coast, 31 Point Hope, And colder out over the southwest coast tonight, 15 to 25, lower 30s for the central Aleutians, and highs in the 30s and 40s, 20s along the southwest coast, followed by lows in the teens on the southwest coast.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on to flying weather, we've got some IFR starting Monday morning off from Kuskokwim Valley, western Alaska Range, northeastward there into the northern Susitna Valley, and along and south of the Alaska Range, and then down across the Talkeetnas and into the Copper River Basin, northeast Prince William Sound, North Gulf Coast, and into the northern Panhandle, with VFR, as you can see, over the central and much of the northern Bering Sea, some marginal VFR from St. Lawrence Island through the Bering Strait up to the western Arctic coast north slope. Another area of IFR over the eastern north slope to the eastern Arctic coast, and some more IFR pushing in toward Shimiana too. And then for the afternoon, things improve. Just areas of marginal VFR over the eastern half of the interior and extreme eastern Arctic coast, Kaktovik, Barter Island, southward to the Alaska Range. And looks like most of the Alaska Range will be on the marginal VFR side, but improving, though, even on the western Alaska Range. And some marginal VFR down along the Aleutian Range, and becoming pretty good VFR, south central Alaska, part of the Copper River Basin, Kodiak Island, North Gulf Coast. Band of IFR, though, still over the northern Panhandle, but as you can see, becomes VFR down toward Dixon Entrance and over toward Misty Fjord Stewart. Good VFR, eastern Bering Sea, and the central and eastern Aleutians, right into the western interior. IFR pulling into the southwestern Bering Sea. And then on Tuesday, it doesn't make too much eastward progress, a little to the northeast there, but staying back over Shimiana 2, marginal VFR almost to right around Adak Island. But the eastern and southeastern Bering Sea, Pribilof Islands, Fox Islands, Bristol Bay, all of southern Alaska looking really good. So marginal VFR now over the northern Panhandle, otherwise VFR either side, Yakutat and down to the southeast. And some marginal VFR, upper Tanana Valley, 40 Mile Country northward there into the Yukon Flats, possibly reaching Arctic Village, but most of the north slope and Arctic coast looking pretty good. And Tuesday afternoon, nothing but VFR over interior Alaska from the Arctic coast all the way down to the North Gulf Coast. Marginal VFR right along the south coast of the Kenai Peninsula. Could remain offshore, though, and some IFR slipping up along the east side of Kodiak Island. And marginal VFR, Yakutat into Lynn Canal Glacier Bay, southern three-quarters of the southeast coast, VFR, and a band of VFR holding out to the west there, west of Kiska Island, and extending northeastward, just some marginal VFR into the Bering Strait. Passes Anatuvik, VFR, Adigan, though, probably marginal throughout most of the day. And Lake Clark and Merrill, VFR, rainy, VFR, but windy, occasionally marginal. Isabel, occasional marginal VFR. And Mintesta, occasional marginal VFR for that pass as well. And Tanita, though, should be VFR, especially in the afternoon hours, late morning through the afternoon. Portage looking good, VFR. Chilkoot and White, though, another IFR day, at least one more. And for the freezing levels, 2,000 to 6,000 feet across the southeast coast, otherwise south of the mainland and the Aleutians. And for the icing, got areas of isolated moderate rime icing possible there over the northern Panhandle. Another areas of over the eastern interior down into the western Copper River Basin there, Talkeetna Mountains, maybe the northern Susitna Valley, and then on down along the Alaska Range to the northern Bristol Bay area. And another weak band there over the central Aleutians, but most of the icing out there will be out over the western Bering Sea. It'll be of the light variety. Jet stream, upper level ridge out there over the Bering Sea at jet stream level, with the jet going over the top of that. Northerlies 120 to 130 knots over the Fox Islands. Trough over mainland Alaska. Southwest flow, south central Alaska, Prince William Sound about 80 knots. Southwesterlies 90 knots there through the central Panhandle. 9,000 feet, 40 to 50 knots across the central southeast coast, 45 knots there just around the Eagle area, otherwise pretty light over interior Alaska, and then westerlies up to maybe 35 knots, northwest coast, Point Hope, Cape Lisburne, stronger winds farther out to the west. As you can see, at 3,000 feet, 75 to 80 knots there from the southwest Bering Sea to just west of Shemya. Otherwise, high pressure over the eastern Bering Sea, extending into much of interior Alaska for the slow improvement. Winds not all that strong, maybe 40 knots off the south coast. Turbulence, considerable moderate chop, eastern Aleutians, AKwx westward to Shemya.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder, and joining us here today is Eric Stevens from the Geographic Information Network of Alaska at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, GINA for short. And Eric, you frequently come on the show to tell us about these really cool things that we're doing with satellites over Alaska and how we can use these really awesome tools. But I'm thinking all the while there has to be a mad scientist somewhere working on the next cool thing in the satellite laboratory. What is being developed today?
Right. Well, you know, when I was a kid growing up in the boonies in North Dakota there, on Sunday after church, the old people, like my parents and their parents, would gather and have coffee and talk. And I kind of eavesdropped on them a little bit. And the theme of a lot of these conversations seemed to be, well, isn't it amazing what they can do these days, someone would say.
Sure.
And I was thinking, oh, I don't know, I was too young.
Right.
Well, now I'm old enough in the weather satellite business.
You can remember when.
The new generation of weather satellites, I'm starting to say, isn't it amazing what they can do these days? Because it's always improving.
Yes.
Maybe an analogy here is like television. Television started in black and white, then it went to color. Analog signal transitioned to digital here a number of years ago. Standard definition becomes high definition. Right. Well, weather satellites are changing too. First weather satellites went up around 1960, not that long ago. No. It's comparatively young science. And every time a new series of satellites is launched, we learn from the past, so the mad scientists decide, well, we could make the next satellite even better in such and such a respect.
Yes.
And now the United States is on the verge of launching, or in progress of launching, a series of new geostationary satellites that are better than ever before.
Okay.
Let's take a look at some of the previews of what these new satellites can do.
Peek inside the lab here, okay.
Yeah, and so we'll peek in, and here are some mad scientists and mad technicians dressed in bunny suits. This is, believe it or not, this is the business end of a weather satellite under construction in a clean room. You don't want a speck of dust on the lens of a weather satellite's camera. So this is done in a clean environment. They are building a geostationary satellite there.
Oh, cool.
This new generation of satellites, if you had to answer the question, why are these better? Why do we care?
Okay.
You could answer it with 3 words: faster, better, more. The new generation of satellites are faster than the older ones. The images are sharper, they're better, and there's more spectral channels. We'll talk about that.
Any one of these called Steve Austin? It sounds faster, better, stronger.
Yeah. You know what, though? These things cost more than $6 million.
Yeah, I'm sure.
They're pricey, but they are an essential tool for the Weather Service to fulfill its mission of protecting lives and property.
Exactly.
You got to have the tool to do the job, and it helps all of us when we get the accurate forecast, the warning in time, and this is the tool. Faster. On left here, we see what the old generation of satellites could scan in 5 minutes. On the right, that's what you get in 5 minutes, the whole planet, or at least one side of it. So it's faster. That means you can take more images over a given amount of time and make smoother movie loops out of that. Because animating movie loops really helps you highlight a feature that maybe you can't see as well in a single image.
Absolutely does, yep.
Let's zoom into a small piece of real estate like Texas.
Sure.
And we can see here a satellite that has a 1-minute movie loop visible light. You can see thunderstorms boiling there.
Yeah, look at that.
Yeah, the rippling of the top of the thunderstorm. This is a fun movie loop. We're going to be able to see things like this more and more often because of the new satellites being generated. Some things are only evident in animation. So that's faster. Well, what's better? We're able to now have sharper imagery than before. The Japanese have a satellite that uses the same imager that is on the new generation of satellites that America is launching too. An imager, that's just a word for camera. It's the camera on a weather satellite. We have something called the Advanced Baseline Imager.
Sounds important.
ABI. It's important enough it has an acronym. Everything's an acronym. Well, an ABI-like instrument is here over the Western Pacific, and we can see this color image. This is what a human eye might see if you were riding on the satellite. But it's a little bit fuzzy. With new technology, you can post-process the image taken by the satellite to highlight and sharpen some of the features. So this image here of the Western Pacific then becomes this image. Thanks to the processing techniques, yes, this is the newest technology. So we've got a new satellite that can provide better data than ever before. And on the ground, we can process it better than before as well to really sharpen up the imagery and to give us a better view of the weather than ever before. So faster and better and more. What do we mean by more? Well, on the older generation of satellites, the imager, the camera, had 5 slices of the spectral pie, visible imagery, infrared imagery, something we can't see from the human eye. A lot of different slices of the pie. We're going from 5. The new imager has 16 slices. Each slice has its own relevance. Some are best for volcanic ash, for smoke, for dust, for telling the difference between smoke and dust, which can look similar under some infrared channels, but other ones bring out certain things. All of these 16 bands are important. In fact, some of the mad scientists, they didn't want 16, they wanted 24. There's always more you can do. But that'll be the next generation of satellites. So now we say, isn't it amazing what we can do these days? And you know what? It makes you think, well, what's the future going to be like too? It's so important to be able to know what's going on now in the weather. If you're going to forecast the future, you got to know where things are now. And satellites are the way to see that, especially in Alaska, where we don't have as many observations down on the ground. The satellites fill in the holes.
Yeah, really important stuff. And I love hearing about what we can see right now, but I love thinking about what is possible in the future. It's amazing stuff. And since you paid for it, it's a good time to learn about it. If you'd like, check out the website at www.goes-r.gov. And as I understand, it's a really easy website to use.
Oh yeah, a lot of good information about what these new satellites mean to Americans. And it's the Weather Service's mission to protect lives and property, and this is the tool how to do it.
Cool stuff, Eric. Thanks so much for sharing that with us today, and thank you for joining us right here in Alaska Weather Facts. We'll see you next time. And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And a coastal water forecast for the southeast coast, small craft advisories for the day Monday. On the south coast, southeast winds 25 knots. Central and north coast winds will be southeast at 30 knots with 12 to 16 foot seas. Lynn Canal Glacier Bay, small craft advisory, south winds 25 knots. Stevens Passage, southeast winds 25 knots with higher gusts. And Clarence Strait, winds will be east at 25 knots with 5 foot seas. And for the day, or for the day on Tuesday, lighter winds for the south coast from the southeast at 15 to 20 knots, and for the north coast, east-southeast at 25 knots, seas around 10 feet. Lynn Canal Glacier Bay, north winds at 15, Stevens Passage, northeast winds at 20 knots, Clarence Strait, southeast at 10. And for Prince William Sound, southwest winds for Monday at 15 knots. North Gulf Coast, same thing, southwest winds 15 knots, but the seas up to 13 feet. Barren Island, southwest winds 15 knots, and Kamishak Bay, west winds at 15. Cook Inlet, south to southwest winds 20 knots with 5 foot seas. And then on Tuesday, winds swing around to the northeast for northern Cook Inlet, 15 knots with small craft advisories for Kamishak Bay and southern Cook Inlet, winds northeast at 30 knots. East winds 30 knots also for the Barren Islands and the western North Gulf Coast, looking at northeast winds Tuesday at 25 knots, east at 20 around Middleton Island. Prince William Sound, northeasterlies at 15. Kodiak Island, south to southwest winds 15 to 20 knots Monday. Alaska Peninsula, north to northeast winds 20 to 25 knots. And Bristol Bay, winds will be south, 15 knots. And for the day Tuesday, gale warnings Kodiak Island, northeast winds 35 knots. And the gales extend from all the way to Cape Sarachev on the Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula, northeast 35 knots. East 25 knots, Bering Sea side of the peninsula. Bristol Bay, east winds 25 knots. Eastern Aleutians, Monday, north winds 30 knots, seas 11 feet. And east or southeast to northeast winds for the central Aleutians at about 20 knots. Gale warnings west of Adak all the way to Shemya for south to southeast winds 35 to 45 knots. And for Tuesday, Western Aleutians, south to southeast winds 40 knots, seas around 20 feet. Central Aleutians, south to southeast winds at 30 knots. And for the eastern Aleutians, east to southeast winds 20 to 25 knots with 7 to 10 foot seas. Southwest coast, small craft advisory for the day Monday. North winds 25 knots along the Yukon Delta coast. South of Nunivak Island 30 knots from the north. Pribilofs north at 25 knots, seas 10 feet. St. Matthew Island, winds becoming south and increasing to 30 knots. St. Lawrence Island and Norton Sound, north winds at 20 knots. For the day Tuesday, storm warnings for St. Matthew Island. South winds increasing to 50 knots, seas building to 26 feet. Otherwise, the Pribilof southeast at 20. East winds 25 knots for the southwest coast, and gale warnings for St. Lawrence Island. Southeast winds 45 knots, seas building to 18 feet. Southeast winds increasing to 20 knots for Norton Sound. Eastern Beaufort Sea coast, Monday, variable winds at 10 knots. West winds 15 knots for the central coast. South winds 20 knots for the western Arctic coast. And from Cape Thompson to Wales, winds will be north at 15. Big increase in the winds from Wales to Cape Beaufort. South 45 knot or south 40 knots on Tuesday, south 35 knots for the western Arctic coast, south 25 for the central coast, and south to southeast winds 15 knots for the eastern coast. For tonight, high pressure over the north slope, but look for some clearing and temperatures probably falling below zero there, but areas of snow continue with an upper level trough at the surface and aloft over the eastern interior that extends back into Bristol Bay with some snow showers. And after some rain tonight, areas of rain and snow tonight, it'll become more showery over south central Alaska and taper off in the North Gulf Coast, but continue through the night and into tomorrow as well, with the showers ending over south central Alaska in the morning. Periods of snow for the eastern interior, light snow, clearing and colder out to the west. Next big storm doesn't make too much eastward progress, could bring some blowing snow to St. Lawrence Island with gale force winds extending down to the central Aleutians. Clear and cold over the interior with strong high pressure, and the persistent area of rain and snow showers for the northern Panhandle, eastern North Gulf Coast. Otherwise, look for some flurries possibly for the western and central Arctic coast. That's all I have time for. Thanks for joining us.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.